Welcome all. I'm glad to see we have so many here with our shared interest in women's empowerment. The topic here the title was A Grand Design, Women's Empowerment. 100 years later, why are we not there yet? With a reference to the Roaring 20s. So I'd like to actually start with Claire, way down on the end. Why are we not there yet? What is it about the Roaring 20s that they were doing right that we're not doing right now? Over to you.
It is on now? Okay, well, thank you, Abigail. I'm not exactly sure where there is in this context, but looking back 100 years, we actually came a long way. And I don't want to be sounding like a tobacco commercial, but we have come a long way in the last 100 years. 100 years ago, the company's role in society was very different from today. Of course, companies play a huge role in the world, in Japan today. In Japan, the EEOL was passed 36 years ago. So we have equal employment opportunity here in Japan. And I think what is quite exciting for me is that there's definitely this convergence of the hard law to the soft law, so that it's not just a requirement that we need to have equal employment opportunity, but on the stock exchange front, there's definitely this movement that we want to really give more opportunity to women. That is the right thing to do. That is the best practice. And that is really the way forward for companies to stay competitive and for Japan to stay competitive. So yes, we have come a long way in the last 100 years and certainly in the last 40 years and more so going forward. So I'm actually quite optimistic.
Yeah, and I think your point is really well taken, that in the 1920s, there was a lot of flappers, a lot of freedom being expressed. But I think your point is very interesting because you cited a lot of the institutional changes that actually took many more years for those to take place. Kathy, what's your sense with this particular issue?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. So as many of you know, I conducted research on this topic starting about 23 years ago when I used to work at Goldman Sachs. And I recall a speech made by Governor Koike Yuriko-san about diversity. And she said this very funny joke. She said she was standing up in this big meeting talking about diversity over and over again. This is over 20 years ago. Suddenly, one gentleman in the audience raised his hand and said, "Can you just stop there? Where exactly is this Daiba city? The city of Daiba." This is serious. He was serious. He was just lost in the conversation. So compared to then and now, I think most of us in Japan, mainstream society now understands the word Taiyosei, diversity. So that's one point. Secondly, to Claire's point, I think it is very heartening to me to finally notice that this is no longer like a nice to have, but a must have. It's now in the context of diversity, and not just gender, but especially cognitive or neurodiversity is imperative for growth for companies and for growth for the economy. And I think that's a huge shift compared to, is there a city called Daiba? And just a couple of brief points. I always get asked, so 23 years, nothing has changed in Japan, is the mainstream commentary, right? Very negative. But three things. Number one, until COVID, Japan's female labor participation rate was one of the lowest in the developed world, raced to 71%, which is higher than both the US, where I come from, and Europe. Number two, transparency. In 2015, the Japanese government passed legislation, Josei Katsuyaku Suishinho, which required disclosure of gender statistics for organizations, public and private. America does not have this law, by the way, but Japan has this law. And third is parental leave benefits. Again, comparing to my home country, the United States of America to this day does not provide national parental leave benefits. But look at Japan. not only to provide these benefits, they're amongst the most generous in the developed world, right? For both the mother and the father. Now, never mind the fathers don't take enough of the leave, but the provision of the benefits is very, very generous. So I'm also on the optimistic camp. We still have a long way to go with women in leadership, still not enough, but I think we're moving the ship in the right direction.
Thank you. Satoshi and Maiko as well, both of you are what I call on the front lines. Satoshi, because you are leading an MBA program, so you see students all the time. And Maiko, because you have the people who need help so that they can women can both work and have a home. And you both see this all the time. So I'd like to start with Satoshi. What are some of the things that you have found that you can do to, how would I say this, raise consciousness among your students, either to encourage the ones who do have an independent mindset or help others overcome maybe previous expectations?
Thank you, Abigail. I think in the education world, it's very important not to only asking that we need diversity, we need to promote female people, but skill set and some of the know-how is very important. I have been in the executive position on different companies, from 2007 as an executive officer. And my role was to improve the diversity, increase the diversity. And what I did many things. And actually, many of my initiatives became failed. And what I learned is that it is not simply promote the female leaders. It is to help create a system that could also support them to be a good leader. And and it took many years, many challenges, but there will be a progress if you make mistakes and make a adjustment. And the continuation of that is so important. As a consequence of that, in the different companies now, in my team, the leader of the operations and sales and marketing are all female in my English MBA program. And I would like to provide those experience, share the know-hows to the people who are trying to become a good leader in the MBA program. So again, it is very important to have a good education, not only the theory itself, but all the practical knowledge. That is, I think it is very important for us as an educational institution of business.
Thank you. And Maiko, as the CEO of a company that does provide home care, nursing care, what are some of the needs that your clients are coming to you for? And is that a key to maybe helping accelerate change in Japan?
Thank you, Abigail, and good morning, everyone. I think so. Poppins, we've always had this mission to support working mothers. It was created 34 years ago, and then I like what everybody was saying. I think it has evolved a lot. One of the issues I still see is that women feel like they need to do it all. They need to do work, they need to do childcare, they need to look after parents, they need to do the chores at home. And then I think as we sort of welcome the change in institution or the private sector, public sector, sort of making different changes in society, I think we need to encourage individuals to embrace those changes, that it doesn't have to be you that does everything. So what we've been doing in our company is providing service, not only like, for example, for childcare, we provide nursery schools, and that nursery school, the quality has to be good. For you to actually leave your beloved child in somewhere for you to be able to work, go back to work, that place has to be good enough or even better than keeping your child at home. And not only nursery schools, but when your child is sick, you have a choice of working or looking after your child. But what if you need to also have a backup plan? What if, for me today, I needed to be here to do the panel? What if my child is sick at home? You know, what choice do I have? So I always manage to have this backup plan to make sure I have a nanny or babysitter or my husband or my grandparents so that I can actually be responsible or true to my profession. And so I think these are sort of the activities that we've been trying to tell women, that you need to sometimes let go or delegate, and it's okay to delegate and let go of certain responsibilities that you feel that you need to embrace 100% in the past. And that, yeah, I think
I suppose we will know that real change has happened when most of your clients end up being men coming running to you saying, how do I do this? So
yeah, with the paternity leave,
yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's probably going
Uh,
to start happen. hopefully.
I mentioned before that my husband is the one who raised the children, stayed home with the children. This was back in the 80s. We started this. It was pretty unusual. But he used to walk around saying, I can't believe women put up with this for so long. He was exhausted. So I'd like to change the topic a little bit and go to talk about the coronavirus and COVID. Claire, did you see any changes in your, corporate leadership and some of the issues that were faced, and what we have all experienced over the last few years? Has that been a good thing or bad thing for women's empowerment consciousness?
Thank you, Abigail, for that wonderful question. So I was in New York during COVID leading an organization. It was the Itochu's North American organization. And then, of course, in 2020, we were hit with COVID like everybody else, a situation that no leader had really experienced in recent decades. And that's really when I realized the importance of diversity of thought. So it's not about, gender, race, nationality, but how important it is to have diversity of thought in order to lead in a situation that you haven't actually experienced before. Because I certainly didn't know how to run this company under COVID. And it was very important for me to have a group of people who could advise me, coming from very different experiences, from the business side, the legal side, the human resources side. So to me, and I think somebody talked about this earlier in the plenary, but when you are looking for a solution or a common ground, it is just so important to have people from different backgrounds so you can actually identify things that you yourself may not be able to, just coming from your own experience. So one, it was really an eye-opener that diversity is so important, especially in times that you really do not know what's happening. Secondly, of course, the technological advances, working from home, which I think enabled many of us to be able to work outside of the office. And this was definitely a benefit, not only for women, but also for, employees, my colleagues with children who needed to, maybe be there at home with them. Having said that, I also saw that many of my female colleagues had a very difficult time working from home, but at the same time, looking after their children who are also learning from home. So I think it's a sort of double-edged sword. Technology advancement is great, but you also need to make sure that some of these gender-based roles also need to be taken into account in order to move in a direction that we can be, I guess, empowered, even in this technological world, with the gender biases still present in our world.
Maiko, in your corporation, did you see a huge change in the kinds of things that people came to your staff to look for?
Yeah, so to add to the point just mentioned, I feel that not only were they working from home, looking after their children, but they also needed to cook for their husband and the family. So it was almost not even double, it's just like triple the work that women had to face. And so that was at the beginning, it was all nice to be at home and to be able to work flexible hours. But then it sort of became a cry for help. And so we actually had an increase in service, providing the service so that we can go and help out, maybe take the children out for 2 hours outside to play while they do the Zoom meeting, or that we can go and cook for the family while both parents are working at home. And so we did see a great change in a shift of sort of the different services that were required during this time. And then also a lot of people are thankful for the nursery schools, which was really nice for my staff. So yeah.
That's great. So changing the subject a little bit again, back to Kathy. You know, we all know you from Womenomics, but you have, while we're still digesting Womenomics and what it means, you have moved into a new field with Empower and Venture Capital. What is the connection? Obviously, Empower is doing more. You could talk a little about that, but there must have been something that you saw that perhaps you could do with Empower in terms of this issue of women's empowerment.
Sure. So after 3 decades working in an investment banks in Japan, during my career in research the entire time, not only did I research topics like diversity, but actually before diversity came along, I did a lot more research in the area of corporate governance. And many of you are very young, so you won't know this, but when I started working in finance, there were very large blue chip companies in this country that did not understand why it was useful to have outside directors on their board. And I am talking the household brand names. I won't name names here to save companies from embarrassment, but it was a different style of governance. And not that everything was bad with Japanese governance, but it was very different from global standards. And I had a lot of institutional investor clients who were kind of on my side trying to change Japanese companies. I had activist funds trying to change Japanese companies, not just foreign, but domestic as well. And in a nutshell, it was very frustrating trying to change the mindset and the behavior of large established corporations. And so my 2 partners and I, Yumiko Murakami, who's here today, and Miwa Seki, we've been friends for decades. We all have a lot of long-term experience in public equities in these big companies. We felt, what can we do to impact the future of this country? We wanted to paint a brighter future for our children, for our grandchildren. And we thought, why don't we focus on startups? Why don't we focus on this part of the ecosystem that Japan really needs because it needs innovation to grow? And because we have experience and knowledge about corporate governance matters or gender diversity, but it was very hard to change established companies' mindset and behavior. But maybe it's a little bit easier when they're teenagers as opposed to adults. And so we thought, why don't we try to instill these principles of what is today called ESG, environment, social governance, into startups with the hopes that because they're younger, that they are more malleable, and that by injecting this early on into their DNA, that will actually enable these startups to grow more sustainably and scale bigger over time. You know, despite the fact that Japan has plenty of money, plenty of talent, leading edge technologies, the amount of venture capital invested last year was 1%, 1% that of the United States. Think about that. For the 3rd largest economy in the world, that is, punching below its weight. And you kind of wonder what's missing what are the ingredients that are missing into us? It's a combination, it's many things, but gender diversity or diversity of thought, as well as a global mindset, is something that we're trying to apply at Empower, is the name of our firm, both into Japanese startups, but we also invest globally.
Great, thank you. So Satoshi, Globus obviously teaches a global mindset. And that's got the title, a great name for an MBA program. But how do you specifically teach diversity and women's empowerment as part of that?
Yeah. So we always talk that the principle to win in the business is to be different. You have to be different from the competitors, or you will not be recognized in the world of business. But very interestingly, in the Japanese market, we always learn be same with others. And that worked, I think, during the 1980s to 2000, because we should only focus on two markets, United States and Europe. But obviously, after 2000, the world has completely changed. The growing area is more diverse. And also, every people have different needs, requirements. And technology is available now to provide some customized services. So what we teach is that obviously in the world of business, you have to be unique, you have to be different, you have to be yourself. And in the education world, we will teach like that at the same time. In the class, we always appreciate different opinions, regardless of whether he is young, she is young or old, or gender, whether he is or she is male or female. Always be different is the way to think something new and create innovation. Ideally, it is easy to talk, but it is very difficult to change the mindset. So what we need to do as a faculty is to always appreciate different opinions. That is very small step, but we have to continue this throughout all classes.
Thank you. While we started out, and I think everyone on this panel is pretty optimistic in terms of women's empowerment and change in Japan, but I'd like to play devil's advocate here and point out that the World Economic Forum 2022 data ranked Japan as 116th in Gender Equality Index, and it was actually dropped from 101 in 2012. So obviously there's something that is not working in terms of these changes. And it brings to my mind the question of how does one make change in Japan? We've talked about the change at the sort of the human level, people looking for care, help, or students learning new ways of thinking. And Kathy talked about sort of venture capital, new companies, teaching them. But how does one change government policy? Can you talk a little about that, Claire?
So the World Economic Forum Gender Empowerment Index is an issue that is dear to me. What is, I think, positive about that ranking is that when it comes to education and healthcare, actually Japan ranks very high. So the overall ranking is very low because we have few women in politics and in leadership roles in companies. So I think the positive side is that we have really educated women. We have very healthy women. So why not, use them more in our, politics and in companies? I think in terms of what we can be doing, maybe one thing is really rethinking the KPI. So the key performance index. And as Kathy mentioned, I think the listed companies certainly are more moving in this direction of disclosure of return on equity, but at the same time, some of the soft things like human capital management. So, and also in Japanese companies, I think the traditional KPI was that how long, have you worked for the company, right? How late do you actually stay with the company and working? No, those KPIs are changing. So I think you have to change those measurements in assessing somebody's skill. That's definitely one thing that we can be doing better. Mm-hmm. I think also that sponsorship is very important for us, women and men, to be sponsoring more women, and maybe sometimes screening out gender biases through AI technology. I think we may need AI to supplement what we cannot do as human beings.
Kathy, I think you have additional.
I was just going to add on the political front, totally agree with Claire on the business front, but what's baffling to me, and of course America is not much better, but the percentage of women in the Shugin, the lower house, has not changed in 75 years, like around 10% or below 10%. So the question, I don't have I don't have voting right, although I pay taxes here, but I have no voting right. But for all of you voters and on the screen, is this acceptable for you men and women, Japanese voters. My guess is it's probably not acceptable that the most important policymaking body in the land is making decisions that affect everybody, that affect your children. That plenary session, the comments made about, it's not about superpowers anymore. It's not about nation states anymore. I think Japan is actually in one of the most geopolitically vulnerable positions right now, today, than it has been in centuries. Okay? So if you're worried a little bit like me, wouldn't you want a little bit more representation of your voice in who's determining national security, right? And of course, social security policies and all of that. I want to leave you two very optimistic movements. One is, people may have heard of the Murakami Fund, the Murakami family. Well, the second daughter, Rei, is leading something called the Public Leader Juku. She just launched this. Please support this movement. She is trying to train women in their teens and 20s and 30s to become like, not just at the kokusei level, not at the national political level in the Diet, but also at the regional government level, because most women politicians start there, right? Another one, do you remember the woman, Nojo Momoko-san? She was a KO, maybe 2年生, 3年生, when she led the petition against Mori, when he made that comment about women. Do you remember that? Overnight, 150,000 signatures she gathered. Well, she's now leading a similar project to promote and support young women who want to get into Japanese politics. And if you know any young Japanese female politician, this is not an easy life. Not only do you need money, but you need a ton of support. If you lose, you're basically unemployed. There's no support system for unemployed, candidates who lose in this country. So these are movements that are happening, and these are women in their 20s and early 30s. And so I'm hopeful that this is the start of change. And I think it will become, it's starting with this youngest generation.
You touched on something that is really striking to me when you said that, what was it, 150,000 suddenly, signed on to this petition. Is my sense of, and I have, I've lived in Japan in the 1980s. I come pretty infrequently, especially because of COVID. But what has struck me is how much cultural change I see here in terms of, you see men bringing their children to preschool. That was not something that you saw. It was almost an embarrassment if a man did that in the 1980s. So there is a cultural comfort level with saying this isn't right, that isn't right. But to translate that into institutional change, I think is difficult. And it was difficult in the US as well. I mean, there was, we had to start organizations like Emily's List that strategically funded women's political candidacies. So
I am officially on the record I am pro quotas in the government of Japan. I'm not that necessarily pro quota in the private sector, but I think Japan cannot afford to wait. I think they need to push it, accelerate it. It can be an experiment. You can try it for a few years and let it go. But if we don't start with quotas or something like that, most countries have quotas, which is why they're ranked much more highly than Japan on the political, vector than Japan is. So let's try it. But I mean, meaning a minimum quota for number of candidates fielded by each party. South Korea did this a few years ago. It's very, very successful. So I highly advocate that.
And but you said in government, but what about quotas for women on boards in the boardroom? Is that something that you think is doable? Yeah, Michael, what's your sense?
I also think that for the private sector, quota system is actually necessary for now. I mean, I'm not saying it's necessary forever, but just to actually jumpstart the whole thing. Because, and in Japan, there's this thing of, there's no company at the moment who's not wishing for female executives to come in. I mean, they're so much highly in demand. I'm sure that many offers are coming to, your hand. And so they may not be ready, but then I think they need to actually step into the role, and then they can actually make a difference. Maybe not everybody is going to succeed, but then if some of them do, then they become the success story. They become the model case, and that there'll be more women who will be encouraged to follow that step. So I think it's very important to make that even as a trial. We need to do that in private sector. Claire, I don't know if you have.
I'm not so sure if quotas in a private setting is necessarily the way to go. And I think we really need to be thinking about, what is really that we're trying to achieve as private companies. I certainly do see the benefit of independent outside directors, because we need to have outside directors' voices in order to have really good strategies. But then to have that gender, addition, I'm still on the fence as to whether I see a benefit of that or not. I certainly believe that in the private sector, what we really need to do is to have more women come through the ranks. It's really easy to have outside female directors be plucked into the board setting, but I also believe that what is more probably important is to have these women go through the ranks, go up the corporate ladder in the private sector, so they can become leaders.
Right. I don't know how it works in Japan, but in the US, if more women on a board, that board is overseeing a company. And women on the board will notice if there are no women being moved up the promotion chain. That doesn't mean that they say, well, you have to promote this one or that one, but it's a way of looking at it. I speak from experience here because I'm on the board of, I can say this, of the Japan America Society of Washington, DC. And when I was asked to join the board, it was because the board president, who had come from another organization, was used to wanted to have more women and a diverse board. So he asked me and several other women. Well, the bottom line is that now that board has several, I can't even tell you how many women it has. It has so many women. But when you're the first woman, it's sort of, you're sort of seen as the test case. So for me, the issue has always been having one is okay, but what you really want to have is several, and then it becomes kind of a natural thing. So
can I just add to that? I think there's still a lot of debate going on in Japan as to what is really the role of the board. Is it really the oversight function? Certainly in certain companies such as mine, the operational side is very, very important. Of course, the board is very important, but it is very crucial to have more women in operational settings. And I think that's why I believe that it's really important to have more women coming through the ranks.
Satoshi, I see your hand.
I am actually supporting to have a target quota, but at the same time, it is not enough. What I have seen in my personal executive career is that in the traditional Japanese companies, many of the important decision is made in the tobacco room. I have seen so many times, and many people, actually staffs, learn it and go to the tobacco room to talk with the executives, which they can't talk in an official meeting. That's wrong, as you all know, and that's not healthy. And so important thing is that, and one good thing now is that we do have now more, because of Corona, we don't have that kind of unofficial room to discuss about, and the more clarity is needed for the evaluation of the staffs and leaders. We are now with more clarity, fact and logic-based evaluation system, in not only in the top level, but all in the middle level of the organization. And that is, I think, what we have to pursue. And also 360 degrees evaluation. In Globis, we have 360 degrees evaluation for all the staffs. And what we see is that it's very clear that the more diverse point of view for the evaluation of the leader is healthy and will promote female leaders, which should have been in the leadership position on the board. So it's not only like a top down, but also from the bottom up or the middle. That is also very important. And that is what we also want to penetrate as well.
Kathy, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. But I'd also add that, at my former employer, Goldman Sachs, we also had 360-degree performance reviews. We had, a lot of programs to mentor and support young women coming up the leadership ranks. But frankly, there were still obstacles. For instance, in the review process, we noticed that as women rose, it's what are the person's positive attributes? What are their areas for development? And then it's qualitative comment. And the problem was in the qualitative comment box where words or adjectives used, we talked about this earlier, like for a male manager, he is a very aggressive, let's see, he has a sales role, very aggressive sales manager. And that, I think in most societies, that would be interpreted in a positive connotation. Wow, he's strong. Aggressive meaning strong, good salesman. But when the word aggressive is attached to a woman's review, especially in, I think, an Asian or Japan context, it's more like, oh, sharp elbows aggressive, even if she's in the similar role. So after a while, we were so frustrated with this bias that we had an AI, a program that read all the qualitative reviews and picked out those 4 women that had these terms like aggressive or whatever. And we actually forced the reviewer to rewrite or at least interpret again, what are you trying to say about the person, whether they're male or female. So there are some implicit biases that we're just not aware of when we're writing, these reviews, but particularly when it comes to women. The other thing I want to talk about was what we discussed in our session earlier is about how women interpret promotion opportunities. I get this all the time. Oh, Matsui-san, Japanese women just don't have ambition because look at all their surveys. Like all the surveys show Japanese women, 誰も, マネージャーになりたくない. Nobody wants to become a manager among Japanese females. But to me, and this goes, frankly, it doesn't apply just for Japanese women, but for all women, I think universally, is if you have a promotion opportunity, let's say there are 10 criteria to succeed in this senior role. You have a male and a female candidate. The female candidate, this is my own experience, they look at the list and they say, oh, I only have 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10 attributes. I am clearly unqualified, so I won't raise my hand. The male peer, exactly the same grade, right? Year of entering the company, looks at that list and they say, okay, for this role, they're not all equal weighted criteria. To succeed in this role, I know the top 3 are most important, and I have those top 3. You got to choose me. I'm clearly the most capable candidate. I know and I'm sorry for the men in this room, I'm making a very broad generalization here, but I have seen this over and over again. And of course, it's this so-called confidence gap. But we as managers need to be mindful and sensitive to this difference. We're just, wired differently, because unless you see that and you push a little bit harder, I love Karubi no Moto Kaicho, Matsumoto-san. He always talked about this, how he would say, if the woman rejected the offer to be promoted, he would not give up. He would go back to her and say, moikai, I am going to 150% support you, back you, right? I will ensure your success. And if you don't like it, you don't think the role fits you, you can always go back to your previous role. And if that didn't work, he would say, じゃあ、あなたの男子部下 I'll promote your male direct report above you. Is that okay? And then about 5 minutes later, she called, no, 私はやる, So there are little, not tricks, but I think things that we just need to be mindful of when we're managing men versus women.
That's brilliant. I always felt that that we should just stop asking people if they want to be promoted and just promote them and make it a fait accompli, because the best people aren't necessarily the ones who are raising their hands saying, pick me. Satoshi-san.
Exactly. That is why management needs wisdom. I do have some real experience that I promoted in my young age. I promoted 2 young executives, women to the executive position, they were being isolated because of the other female people. And I never expected that to happen. I had a very strong confidence on those two people, but those two actually left because they felt some isolation. So there, I need to be more with the wisdom that then I changed my way. I always assigned the deputy with a veteran male person who actually makes some very detailed instructions and do not let the lady who is now being number one to make detailed instructions and let her listen to the people in the forefront of business. And I'm not telling this is the right solution at all. And it is the wisdom how we let those potential female leaders to be selected, not only to be raising their hands, but also be successful leader. That is not easy, but that is where I think we need in Japan, need very much prudence to promote this diversity in the organization.
Thank you. We only have a couple of minutes left before the Q&A, so I'd like to return to where we started, which is what can we do to craft a grand design for another Roaring 20s, and ask each of you very quickly what one of the top one or two things would be that you would want to focus on changing or encouraging in Japan to be able to accelerate women's empowerment. And Maiko, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. So I think there are two things I would do. One is to keep promoting, to encourage sort of the mindset change of women themselves so that they can keep their hands up, they can go for their challenges, and for them to certain way let go of some of the burdens. That's almost like a curse in my view, that has been placed upon us as a role in a society. And that's a really long way to go, because you've been brought up in that mindset. So that's one. And the second one is making sure that we have a quality supporting services to make sure that they can succeed in life. And that's not just in childcare, but it's in senior care, in anything that you need to balance in life. And as long as there's a quality of choice there, then you may actually have a choice in a matter of balancing your career and work.
Thank you. Kathy.
So I already mentioned I'm an advocate of quotas in the public sphere. The other thing we did not talk about on this panel is another angle of diversity, which is non-Japanese people. And I think it's painfully obvious to everybody in this room and on the screen that the country needs labor, and it is running out of labor very, very rapidly. And in most countries, Europe or elsewhere, the way they supplement that gap is through importation. And of course, Japan is trying in a very pragmatic way, but I think it is way too slow. And I worry particularly about, lower skilled, but also higher skilled talent like engineers or talent that's going to take Japan into the next century. So that's where I would focus.
Thank you. Satoshi.
Two things. Number one is to gain a consensus that diversity is the key to success in the business, number one. Number two, challenge and make some small failures and adjust it, and continuous challenge. I think these two are very important from the management point of view.
Excellent. Thank you. And Claire, to wrap it up.
Yeah, it really needs an all hands on deck approach. And I did talk about private companies, but I really do believe this needs to start much, much earlier in education. So UNESCO, for example, has this textbook project in identifying gender biased textbooks, or having actually textbooks that are very gender neutral. And I think Japan really needs to have something like that, so that we actually educate our next generation very early on to be more gender neutral and hopefully bias-free.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking this panel, and then we will move to Q&A. So. Okay, so for Q&A, I understand we have online questions and in person. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. Thank you.
First of all, Sorry. First of all, thank you very much for the discussion. I'm the CHRO of a Japanese company, and what I see is that maybe we need another image of management at all, because what I get from my females is, I don't want your miserable life. For me, management is not appealing. It's not attractive. So, and maybe we need to talk about management in a different way.
Thank you. Do you want to, Kathy?
Absolutely, 3,000% agree with your answer, because I think that is very common across, the entire society. And I also worry a little bit about just like media commentary about the life of managers and why women don't want to become managers and how little sleep they get already. They're never going to sleep if they become a manager. It's so negative. And I try to, at least, when I was a manager, to talk about the positives and being a working mother manager, right? How much I learned raising children and making 10,000 mistakes, right, along the way, but how those mistakes and lessons learned I could apply to managing, adult children, people, right, in my organization. And so I think, yeah, I would totally agree. I don't know how to change that overnight, but I think we have to talk about the positives, how you get to be more integrated in the decision-making of an organization, whatever it is, but also the evaluation process needs to shift. It cannot be time-based, seniority-based metrics that evaluate both the men and the women. That has to change. But I'm hopeful, because I think this younger generation, I'm surrounded by, entrepreneurs and people my kids' ages every day. I can tell you this young generation of Japanese men think differently. They don't want to work those long hours that their fathers and grandfathers did. No way, right? They want life and a little bit of work is what my sense is. So I'm encouraged by that I think at the margin, it's beginning to shift, but I totally agree. Yeah.
Thank you. You had a question as well.
Well, thank you for that mini masterclass. I'm Paul Dupuis from Randstad. I've been very fortunate, from Canada originally, but I've been in and out of Japan over the past 32 years, 4 times. My 4th time circling back to Japan. Most recently, I was in India for 4 years, where I was CEO of Randstad there. And just one observation and then a question. I need your advice as a CEO, trying to promote what you talked about. In India, what I saw was my leadership team of 14 CXOs, 7 were women. In Japan right now, out of the 14, we have 1, and she's someone that we've had to nudge and push and do a lot of things you talked about. And I'm thinking about the support system. In India, everyone has a home helper. And when I talked to the women on my leadership team and they asked about Japanese women, they were very surprised to hear that there's no support system like they have in India with nursery schools and so on. In fact, on site in our offices, we had nurseries for our employees. Of course, to help our women, pursue new opportunities. So that's one observation. I think the support system is really a key trigger. I saw it in Singapore as well when I was based there. The question I've got is for maybe some advice for leaders like me who are trying to promote this idea that women can become leaders in the organization. When we do internal job postings, the number of women who raise their hand, Kathy, to your point, is always disproportionate. It's always the men, exactly what you said. And when we dig in, we find out that they feel they're not qualified for everything in the criteria. I'm always aware that we should be careful not to push women into a role that maybe they don't want. And so I guess the question is, what advice do you have for leaders like me? I like the Calbee story. I might try that one tactic with a couple of our up and rising women, but what can we do today to kind of plant the seeds for this culture of helping women to rise?
I see that as two different ones, because the first one, you should just talk to the Poppins people. And then the other, maybe Claire, you could provide some advice, solicited advice.
Sure. So with respect to the second question, I think what's really important, of course, is to sponsor women, but also to really ask the question of why they're not applying. Maybe it is this, I'm not worthy kind of a way of thinking, but is it really that or something else? A lot of the women that I have talked to thought that becoming a manager or being promoted actually means more time, more responsibility. And can I manage all of that? So it wasn't really necessarily her ability, but just not wanting to be in a situation where she was taking on so much more. And what is actually quite surprising is that once you become a manager, you actually have so much more free time, at least in my experience, because you have people to delegate work to. And maybe that's the kind of expectation that you can talk about with women.
And Michael.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean in terms of support system, and even the government actually in Japan, they've actually prepared a lot of support systems, but they're not very good at PR. And so not many companies actually know about these subsidies that are provided to the employee. So for example, nursery schools in Japan, as you know, they're practically free now. If you compare that to the US or abroad, where you have to pay $3,000 a month, it's practically free in Japan. So anybody, now that awaiting children are decreasing, that they can go into the nursery. And on top of that, this is from Suga-san, the ex-prime minister. He actually said, in order to support working parents, you can't just have one option, but you can have nursery schools, babysitters, nanny service, senior care, and then they should all be subsidized by the government. And so now what's happening is that babysitters are subsidized. You just need to apply to, it's called Naikaku Bebishita Chiketto, and your employee can get a benefit or the subsidy for using 2 hours, 3 hours a day. But not many companies know that. So what we're doing is promoting those sort of free seminars to make sure that we're all aware that these systems actually services are available to everybody, and that you can actually include that into your employees' benefits. And that can help slowly but surely, that there's definitely a help that you can use. So as a CEO, I'd really encourage you to to use those systems because they're very beneficial.
Thank you very much for very empowering discussion. My name is Jun Koyama, and I have a question about political scene in Japan to Kathy. I actually ran for upper house election this summer, and I am one of the unemployed or self-employed candidates. And I ran from LDP because it has the biggest stake and it has least women candidates. But you mentioned about blue chip companies or established companies in Japan, how difficult it was to change the mindset of these governance and management. I was wondering what wisdom you would have to persuade established political parties to have more women candidates. Yeah, I would love to hear your opinion about how we can change the established big parties.
First of all, thank you for being courageous enough to run. I think that is an enormous risk that somebody takes, no matter what your gender. So kudos to you for having run, and I hope you don't give up. I hope you try again. Secondly, to your question, I think in the work that I did, it was relatively easy because I just played with numbers. I said, what if more women worked in Japan? What would that do to GDP? And if you can make that, argument based on economic rationale, it's hard to dispute, statistics, basically. So maybe I have to do a next Womenomics 6.0 on what is the economic gain from having a more diverse mix in parliament. I'm sure there are studies, out there, but something tells me that we're all smart human beings and we probably don't need studies to show and prove that 95 versus or 90 versus 10 is not a healthy balance for, again, the most important decision-making body of this nation that's determining very important policies, whether it's, national security, as I said earlier, or economic policies. We have a poverty problem in Japan. Do we deal enough with that? I don't know. I don't think so, but it's not getting better. It seems to be getting worse. And this is an advanced nation. Why is there so much poverty in this country, right? Why are wages so low, by the way? The average engineer apparently in Japan is now getting paid less than the average engineer in Vietnam. That's crazy to me, right? And of course, it's partly the exchange rate, but it's not entirely just the exchange rate. So there are very deep embedded structural things, I think, in this country that we should all work together. I don't like these lines of, oh, you belong to this group, you belong to that group, or political faction or political party. We are all interested in a brighter future for this nation. So how do we work together? And I think particularly voices like yours that are young. I actually believe my little policy proposal is to give every Japanese below the age of, 18, the voting age? Give every Japanese below the age of 18 2 votes. So babies can vote. Maybe babies should have 5 votes, but that has to happen because people don't vote here. That's another problem, right? That's kind of why we have the government we have, is there's not much political participation. So anyway, I'll go on and on, but I think your point is very well taken. I think we do need maybe some more evidence that demonstrates this is good policy that benefits everybody, not just one particular group.
You had a question, yes.
Hello, thank you very much for your very informative session today. My name's Eric. I'm an MBA student here at Globus. I'm actually thinking to make a startup, but one of the things I want to address is, and I'm going to throw this into the mix, is aging society. And I think we haven't really discussed about children, but I know Poppins is addressing this issue directly, but where do you see like children and having families being amongst the important issues to address along with diversity? Thank you.
I'm not quite sure I
yes.
understood what the question is.
From the context of maybe solving these kind of problems, like as a person who's trying to make a startup, where would you say that we should start? Like, is it the mindset, or what should we do?
Okay. Kathy, do you want to talk about this?
Well, I think it's
The startup question.
Yeah, I think obviously we need to change the mindset. We need to fix unconscious biases or myths that persist. We need to change textbooks. We need to change many things in the media. But again, I think compared to when I first came to Japan over 30 years ago, I think there's been quite a significant improvement. So again, I think we're moving in the right direction. But to your question about demographics and the aging and how we're going to encourage more, Japanese to have more babies and all that, to me, it's very simple. Human beings will bring other human beings into the world if they have a brighter outlook about the future. If the outlook is bleak and dark, you probably don't want to bring a baby into the world, right? So it's about your outlook for the future. And to me, it's not incumbent on the government. It's not incumbent on the private sector. It's incumbent upon all of us to try to work together to create that brighter future. And I find maybe I'm an overly optimistic American, lived here too long, but Japan is, many people are so, shikata ga nai is, I hate that word, shikata ga nai. Like there's always a shikata ga aru. So let's find a solution and let's try to work constructively and together on finding a solution. It's not easy. It's a marathon, but it can be done. Yeah.
Okay, time is up. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank the audience for your questions. I want to thank our panelists. I don't know about you, but I could easily spend hours with each one of you individually with all of the wealth of experience we've had on this panel today. So now please do join me in thanking our panel.